Hey everyone, welcome back to Bold Faith Bible. Today we're going to be answering some of your questions. We're going to be talking about millennialism, which is the future 1,000-year reign of Christ, or the present 1,000-year reign of Christ. Specifically, we're going to be talking about amillennialism, but we're also going to be talking about how to share the gospel with a Mormon and how to share the gospel with a Jehovah's Witness. In that question, there's two very big, distinct questions there. And then we're also going to dive a little bit into, as we're studying through the book of Hebrews, I was going to touch on it a little more in the future, but we're going to talk about who actually wrote the book of Hebrews. And I'm going to kind of walk you through why it very well could have been Apollos, and or it could be Paul, but a lot of folks are kind of now swinging a little more towards Apollos, and we're going to walk through some of the biblical passages of why and some of the things that are mentioned in the book of Hebrews that really point to that. So we got a whole bunch of stuff. Let's jump right into it. So this is a question from Linda. I would like to hear more about what amillennialism is. So millennialism, but in front of it. I have looked at it several times and still don't think I have a good grasp on its meaning entirely. And of course, please discuss why it's incorrect. All right, so amillennialism, what is it? So basically you have three main views out there. You have premillennial, you have amillennial, and you have postmillennial. Now, postmillennial and amillennial are very close together. You could basically call postmillennialism basically optimistic amillennialism. Premillennialism is kind of where I stand, so to give you some bias warning right there on the front end there. And what is this even talking about? Well, in the book of Revelation, right, future things or talking about the prophecies, there is this section mostly in Revelation 20, and we're going to read through that. I want to give you kind of a clue into kind of the amillennial kind of perspective on it, and then we'll read through the passage and you can kind of listen for it. Amillennialism is a historical, so basically, let me just read this to you. The amillennial view, along with the premillennialism, are the oldest in church history, being held since the 1st century. So premillennial and amillennial. In the 5th century, St. Augustine, right, settled on the amillennial view as his understanding of future things. Additionally, amillennialism was the primary view of the reformers in the 16th century. So when we got Protestantism, the people that were behind that, Luther, Calvin, those guys, they were mostly amillennialists. So we're not talking about something that's like deep heresy. We're just talking about how do we take apart the book of Revelation and future times. So this is not a kooky, like, heretical view. This is a view that good, godly people can disagree on. And so if you hold to the amillennial view, or as I describe it, if you're like, hey, that's kind of what I believe, that's how I understand things, though then, I disagree with you, but okay. I don't like having bland colored cars either. So you might disagree with me on that. I think that they're just boring. Why does everyone have to have black, white, and gray cars anymore? I say that as I have a silver car because it was just a good buy. Anyway, so the amillennialist is going to say this 1,000-year reign of Christ that's described in Revelation 20 is spiritual. It's not really literal. It's talking about what's happening in the spiritual realm. It's not talking about what's happening down here on earth. So it's kind of like Revelation gives you this description of kind of all the stuff that's actually happening, and then it either kind of goes back and kind of spiritually describes what's happening, or it's going to it's talking about what's happening with the angels and demons and stuff like that in the background. So it's not a physical understanding of history. Now, postmillennialism says like basically that 1,000-year reign of Christ is here right now, and things are going to get better and better and better until everyone in the world basically accepts Christ as their Savior, and then Jesus comes back. That's why I say it's the optimistic view. Amillennial says, well, it's just spiritual, and so it's not necessarily like we're not going to really see it here on earth necessarily. It's just describing what's happening right now. Basically just negates the millennial, so it's like basically saying there isn't going to be a millennium. It's just talking about just kind of what's happening already. So basically you could just take Revelation 20 and go, oh, okay, that's happening, cool. And then just look at the rest of it and focus on the rest of it, which either was fulfilled in the first century, depending on your view, or it is describing what's happening right now, or potentially even, what will happen later on. But as we read through this passage, I want you to keep that in mind. Okay, so is this passage talking about something that's literally going to happen? Like it's a future event, hey, pay attention. Or it's, this is just kind of what's happening. Or a motivation for Christians on earth to get their act together, preach the gospel so that everyone on the earth can get saved, so that therefore Jesus can kind of come back. Okay? Revelation 20, starting in verse 1. And I saw an angel coming down out of heaven, having the key to the abyss and holding in his hand a great chain. He seized the dragon, that ancient serpent, who is the devil or Satan, and bound him for 1,000 years. He threw him into the abyss and locked and sealed it over him, to keep him from deceiving the nations anymore until the 1,000 years were ended. After that, he must be set free for a short time. I saw thrones on which were seated those who had been given authority to judge. And I saw the souls of those who had been beheaded because of their testimony about Jesus, because of the word of God. They had not worshipped the beast or its image, and had not received its mark on their foreheads or their hands. They came to life and reigned with Christ 1,000 years. The rest of the dead did not come to life until the 1,000 years were ended. This is the first resurrection. Blessed and holy are those who share in the first resurrection. The second death has no power over them, but they will be priests of God and of Christ, and will reign with him for 1,000 years. So, are there resurrected people who have been beheaded for the name of Christ? So, who has been beheaded for the name of Christ and been resurrected, and they're ruling with him? They've been given authority to judge. Where are these people? They're not here physically on earth. Okay, there's no resurrected people here on earth that are followers of Jesus that have been resurrected, right? So, are we talking about something that's spiritually happening? Okay? But still raised again to life, spiritually, like they're ruling in heaven. What does that mean? And is Satan really bound right now? With all the evil that's happening in the world, is that just like all us? Is that like all us right now? So that's a couple little, that's just me poking a couple holes in it right there, right? Let's continue. When the 1,000 years are over, Satan will be released from his prison and will go out and deceive the nations in the four corners of the earth, Gog and Magog, and to gather them for battle. In number they are like the sand of the seashore. They marched across the breadth of the earth and surrounded the camp of God's people, the city he loves. But fire came down from heaven and devoured them. And the devil who deceived them was thrown into a lake of burning sulfur, where the beast and the false prophet have been thrown. They will be tormented day and night forever and ever. So, that's the question: is this 1,000 years a literal rule of Jesus here on earth? And there's other passages that describe it and fill it out more fully of exactly what will happen. The lion will lay down with the lamb. Which is not actually the best. That's actually not even in the Bible. But everyone kind of uses it like that. The child will stick his hand into the serpent's den and will not be harmed. But we have this description that's generally about all that, basically. And it's talking about a time where there will be peace. Creation will be restored. And and the sin nature upon creation will be removed, and Jesus will physically reign, it seems like. So is that just a spiritual talk about what's happening right now, or is that physical time to come? So I believe that that the premillennial view, I believe that when it talks so clearly about this millennial reign, I don't see that as applying to what's happening right now. It just doesn't seem to jive. Post-millennials will say that this is happening right now, and it's going to just get better and better until Jesus comes back, and then Satan will be released, and there'll be this giant revolution or something like that. And, kind of maybe tying that together with the 7-year tribulation period. But there's different ways to kind of weave it. There are different branches of amillennial and kind of ways that they parse different things, but that's generally the amount of it. The second question here is, so who do you believe wrote Hebrews? Because I don't think it was Paul. And that is an important question out there. Now, Paul is not a bad answer to who wrote the book of Hebrews, but let me talk about why it's so important that we know who the author of Hebrews is, right? Why do we have the books of the New Testament that we have? It was because of who actually wrote them. One, we have people who are actually apostles, who are with Jesus, or people that were directly connected to them that were basically writing for the apostles. So like Luke was directly connected to both Paul and Peter. We also have Mark, the Gospel of Mark, right? John Mark was kind of there for a bunch of the events. He's apparently the guy that fled naked out of the garden when Jesus was seized. We also have he was traveling around with Barnabas and Paul, and he was later commended by Paul even after his issue that he had on the first missionary journey. But so the books of the New Testament all are kind of either directly connected with an apostle or written by an apostle. So that's kind of a problem for us if we don't know who wrote the book of Hebrews. Now, in the book of Hebrews, it doesn't say who actually wrote it. And pretty much all the other books, we have somebody saying, well, this is me. I'm the one who wrote this. Historically, we've been, there's a lot of people that have been kind of leaning towards Paul, saying it's basically Paul. He's writing to a different audience, and he decides in sort of way not to inflame them. He's not going to tell them Paul, because he has kind of amongst the Jewish nation, a lot of people have been warned about him, so he just keeps his name off of it. But there are some things that kind of go against Paul. And that is that while it is very much in line with his teaching, so whoever wrote this definitely is very much in agreement with Paul on the gospel and on doctrine and such. He uses phrases that Paul uses and sounds very echoes of Paul, but at the same time, it's very different style. The person who wrote this seems to be more educated, more formal in Greek, more comfortable with Greek, and it's considered highly literary and very ornate. Also, the vocabulary is very sophisticated. So it includes 150 words, Greek words, that are not found elsewhere in the New Testament. 10 that don't occur in any other Greek writings that we've ever seen before. So this is using very specialized, very technical Greek language, which Paul doesn't seem to use. So it seems like this person knows Greek better than Paul does. And then on top of that, we have the structure of the epistle confirms that it's like different logic, different training, it seems like. So whoever who's writing the book of Hebrews is, I'm sorry, I'm having power outages and everything like that, and I got my main lights on battery backup, but that thing is still on the house line, so you can see if my power's on or off with that. So sorry about the blinking light. So it sounds like this person's been trained a little differently. And then on top of that, this author doesn't introduce himself as Paul, which Paul does on every single one of his letters. Also, the intro and outro are a little different. And the theology, even though it's really compatible with Paul, it's distinctive nonetheless. He alludes to Jesus as a priest, and that's kind of one of the main cores of Hebrews, but we don't see Paul ever talking about Jesus as a priest elsewhere. But here's the biggest deal. There's this little phrase in Hebrews 2, verse 3, where the author describes that the gospel was confirmed to us by those who heard the Lord announce salvation. So it's this passage where it says that the gospel was delivered to us, and you're kind of like, well, it was confirmed by people to us, not Paul. Paul heard the gospel directly from Jesus. So why would Paul say that? Paul wouldn't say that. And so that's just kind of a passage you're just like, I don't think Paul wrote this, because he wouldn't say that. That doesn't make any sense. And so that they received the gospel from people points to the fact that this isn't Paul. So who is it? Who are the other potential people that we know of? Now, it could be just somebody we've never heard of before. That's possible. But it seems like it's someone who has a good bit of authority in the early church. We also see that because the doctrine is so closely linked with Paul's, it seems likely that this person was a close associate of Paul. They echo Paul a little too much to not really be in his circle. Clearly, they were highly educated Greek. So probably actually a Greek background person, not a Jewish background person. They may be a Jew, but they grew up somewhere Greek, right? The person did clearly come out of Judaism into Christianity. So not like pagan to Christian. It was clearly they came out of a Jewish tradition to become Christian. Their understanding of the gospel, though closely linked with Paul, is slightly different, though. So Apollos is one of the names that's kind of thrown out there a lot. Now, first reason why maybe Apollos is because he was from Alexandria. So Greek city in Egypt, where the Library of Alexandria, right? Highly educated, makes sense there. Part of the reason, too, is that some of the structure of the arguments theologically seem to echo kind of some of the theology arguments that we hear actually coming out of Alexandrian thought. So we actually have some books and stuff like that from Alexandria that weren't destroyed in the fire, but it kind of echoes that. So him being from Alexandria actually kind of makes some sense on that one. He was taught by Paul and Paul's companions, Priscilla and Aquila. Paul and Apollos knew each other, and they encouraged each other. He was highly educated Alexandrian. He was well spoken of as a highly effective speaker, which points once again, very eloquent. He was a Jewish believer, and he had thorough knowledge of the Old Testament and the Scriptures, so that links up there too. Apollos was a great defender of the Christian faith, vigorously refuting and opposing the opposing Jews in public debate and proving from the Old Testament that Jesus was the Messiah. We find that in Acts chapter 18, verse 28. So he according to church tradition, he became extremely influential, even almost up to the level of being an apostle. He was not an apostle, but at the same time, he was kind of viewed that way. And him having penned a book like Hebrews kind of would go a long way to people kind of treating him that way. So that's kind of why people kind of point to Apollos. So a little bit of church history that's not in Scripture, but then a lot of things in Scripture kind of clue us into that he might be a highly likely contender for that. Now, there was discussion when the New Testament was being compiled as to whether to add Hebrews or not to the New Testament because the authorship could not be confirmed. And because of that, there was a little bit of conversation about it, but then everyone kind of gave it a thumbs up because they're like, it's useful. And even though we can't prove where it came from, we're all using it. It's a blessing to us. And let's err on the side of including it into the Bible. And that's kind of their attitude with the whole conference was like, if something was on the borderline, it's like, just put it in the Bible and people can decide for themselves. Because we don't want to exclude something from the scriptures that should be there, right? So they basically just threw some stuff in there that you kind of like, why do they have the book of Jude in here? 3rd John? Seriously? Like, they found a little scrap and they're like, hey, it's from the Apostle John. Yeah, it's not really useful for anything, but let's just put it in there, you know? So, moving on, here's the question. What is the best way to witness to a Mormon or Jehovah's Witness about the gospel of Jesus? I'm going to link some resources down below, but this is 2 big, massive topics, unfortunately. So I'm going to give you a short summary, but go follow the links down below if you want to find out more. Jehovah's Witnesses and Mormons are completely different things, but they kind of go off in some of the same directions. The biggest things for Jehovah's Witnesses is that they don't believe in the deity of Jesus Christ, and you're going to hear the same thing about Mormons. They kind of do it a little differently, but they basically deny the deity of Jesus as well. So Jesus' deity is the main crucial issue for JWs or Jehovah's Witnesses, and that's what you're going to have to focus in on. Now, they're going to talk very highly about Jesus, but then they're not going to like actually say he's God. They have a translation in their hands when you talk to them, and they're going to the NWT. It's been an edited version of the Bible where they basically tried to take out the deity of Jesus as best they could. The problem is Jesus' deity is all over the New Testament, and they weren't able to kind of snuff out all of the different points where it shows up. So I'm going to give you 2 passages where you want to kind of lead them, and you can then build your arguments off of this. Basically, you want to show them a passage where it clearly shows the deity of Jesus and then hold their feet to the fire. You want to do it lovingly, respectfully, but they're going to want to hop all over the Bible. They want to give you all their proof texts about why Jesus is, and most of them are edited texts where they've changed the Bible, and that's kind of where they're coming from on those things. So, first one is John, the Gospel of John, chapter 1, verse 3. Now, they've already edited verse 1 and 2 and some of this other passage, but I want you to focus in on verse 3. Their translation says, all things came into existence through him, and apart from him nothing apart from him not even one thing came into existence. This is speaking of Jesus. They know it's speaking of Jesus. That's why they've already edited other parts of this passage. But just the fact that this is saying that Jesus created everything, it's kind of a big deal. When you connect this up with other passages where it basically says that God or Yahweh, they always have Jehovah everywhere in the Bible, you can see that he clearly, if he created everything, well then that excludes Jesus. And if Jesus wasn't created, Jesus couldn't create himself. So if he created everything, all things came into existence through him. So did Jesus come into existence through Jesus? That's just nonsense, right? So you can just build that argument off there, hold their feet to the fire, and make them deal with this text. It's coming from their Bible. And don't get into an argument about translations. It won't go anywhere. So hold their feet to the fire. Also, Hebrews 1, verses 8 through 12. But apart from the Son, he says, this is their translation, but apart from the Son, he says, God is your throne forever and ever. The scepter of your kingdom is the scepter of uprightness. You loved righteousness and you hated lawlessness. That is why God, your God, anointed you with the oil of exaltation more than your companions. And at the beginning, O Lord, you laid the foundations of the earth, and the heavens are the works of your hands. This is speaking of Jesus, right? They will perish, but you will remain. And just like a garment, they will all wear out. And you will wrap them up just as a cloak, as a garment, and they will be changed, and you will be the same, and your years will never come to an end. Take them over to Psalm 102, verse 1 and verses 25 through 27. They're going to have a link over to verses 25 through 27. But make sure they read verse 1. Okay? So we know who we're talking to, right? Verse 1 says, "O Jehovah, hear my prayer." This is their translation where they like to stick Jehovah into everything, right? So this is a prayer to Jehovah, and then it talks about how Jehovah, long ago you laid the foundations of the earth. Wait, over here in Hebrews, it speaks of Jesus laying the foundations of the earth. Wait a minute. Are you saying that Jesus and Jehovah are the same person? Well, according to your translation, that's what it says. That's what it says. And they hold to their translation. So don't get into an argument about translations. Just show them in their own translation. You want to go to Reformation21.org. Reformation, the numbers 21.org. And they have this breakdown of how to walk through these two arguments, and they have a lot more helpful information there that you can use to witness to Jehovah's Witnesses. All right, moving on to Mormons, because we're not going to cover just a little bit today. We're going to cover everything today. So basically, first thing you need to understand is Mormons do not believe the same thing you do. The more you delve into it, the more you'll see that we see spoken of Jesus. They call Jesus Jehovah. And he was the first spirit child born of Elohim and the Heavenly Mother. Jesus was born by God as a spirit baby. And Satan was his brother. Yeah. Pay attention to that, folks. That is definitely not what Christians believe, okay? And they will also say that basically that as Elohim is, as God is, you will be. That's why the eternal marriage thing is so important to them, because they're going to get their own planet and start having spirit babies themselves. Yeah, crazy stuff. Crazy stuff. So what can you do? This is coming from Together for the Gospel. The gospelcoalition.org. I'll have a link down below once again. You can go over there and read these things for yourself. I'll walk you through this real briefly. You want to focus in on three things. Salvation is a free gift from the Father. And you can, as long as you use a KJV version, they should be good with that. They do have their own translation, but they haven't monkeyed with it as much as the Jehovah's Witnesses have. They've monkeyed with it a little bit, but if you use a KJV Bible, they will generally recognize that as a legitimate translation. So even if you don't use KJV, just for the sake of talking with them, you might want to pull one out, okay? That way you have the firm footing. They'll accept it, but you also get clear teaching, right? So salvation is a free gift from the Father. Focus in on that. Ephesians 2:8-9, Romans 5:8, Romans 6:23. Focus on those things. Their Book of Mormon adds on to the Bible, but it doesn't negate the Bible, so make sure you just use the Bible, okay? They're going to want to go everywhere else, go to these passages, and make them deal with these passages. Second, Jesus is the final prophet, priest, and king. This is huge because the Book of Mormon adds on to Jesus' teaching. So share passages, Hebrews 1:1-4, 2 Timothy 3:16 and 17. Focus in on that Jesus is the final prophet. He is the last thing. And then finally, third, there is no need for a mediator between us and God except for the risen Christ. So 1 Timothy 2:5-6, Galatians 3:20. Make sure that they don't focus in on that you don't need a church leadership between you and God. Just focus in on how Jesus is sufficient as that intermediary. And that that will really move you in the right direction with that conversation. So salvation is a free gift from God by faith alone, grace alone, right? Jesus is the final prophet, priest, and king. And thirdly, that Jesus is the only mediator needed between you and God. All right, folks, there's a lot there. Hopefully that points you in the right direction. I'll get this video out a little bit late because of the power outages. I have to do some editing to put some of these pieces together. But please do send your questions. I have a few more questions that were sent to me that I wasn't able to get to in this episode. We'll try to deal with those next Saturday. You can pop those down in the comments of any one of the videos on this channel, and we will try to address those as we go forward. Thanks so much for watching, and God bless you all. I will see you at a sermon tomorrow, Sunday morning, and then, of course, our weekday Bible studies. God bless you all, everyone.